The bios for all of my fellow panelists are up, and I also put a chat reminder in as well for everybody, so everyone can see who you're talking to or listening to, and there's no reason, therefore, to do intros. But let me kick right off with you, Karen, if I could ask you a question to get everyone going. I think everyone knows that you've been working for much of your career on making sure all artists have equal access to stages, to audiences. How has COVID-19 affected that? Just to talk about a current issue right away.
Yeah, so we work particularly with the hip hop community. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin in the US, and we are in a situation where we have a pretty vibrant music scene, but it's very difficult for hip hop artists and more broadly in general artists of color to get staged opportunities and even placement in certain festivals. And the COVID-19 it's emerging that there's some similar inequities happening within all of the live streaming that's coming up. So we have different organizations, different record labels, different individuals who are coming out with their live stream concerts or their personal artist pages, and we're just not seeing that hip hop representation. There's another issue that comes into play when you look at technology. So there's a little bit of a different approach to this, and we're even seeing this with professionals who are doing this online, such as DJ Premier and Rizza, who recently struggled through some Instagram live battle tech issues. And so it's about people who don't necessarily have, or they're working from their phone and they need to play electronic music as opposed to performing with just a guitar or an instrument or a voice. And so there's some issues that come into play with, sound compression and sound quality. And even though everyone's very forgiving in this era of instant streaming, which I know my panel colleagues will talk about, it's not new, but we're just finding out about it. People are very forgiving, but still, how do we make this something that everyone can access? Now, on the flip side, this does give us an opportunity to get hip hop artists in front of more people that might not, in general, attend a show. And this could be really helpful to expand the fan base of the local artists here.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Kwende, you've been working even before the crisis on the issue of local venues closing and what's to be done about that. We were talking about networking just there. What are the effects, the network effects of local venues closing on the global music industry?
And I mean, that's I think that's a good question. It sort of relates to what was just being said, because, I think that, the global music industry really happens in all of our, in all of our localities, and it happens in a range of places that are actually local to communities. And so when we see, that the failing or if there isn't that support for that layer of the industry, we're going to see effects that go all the way up into the international music industry. And we saw it go the other way. Certainly, I experienced it personally, and people around me that went South by Southwest or some of these other sort of like major industry nodes in the touring structure of the music industry fell out. Whole international tours and so on also began falling out, and it affected all of these local places when this one big node failure happened within the network. And so, you have to wonder, one, about that codependency between sort of this sort of broader international network of events and music festivals and touring network more broadly, and these local places. Obviously, there's an effect going one way, but then you have to imagine that there will be an effect going the other way. And I think that, there's that's an area where there can be more research in terms of understanding the relationships between, understanding more concretely the relationships between global industry structures and localized sort of urban networks.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring it right down to fans. How do we keep fans on board? How do we keep the artists and their fans connected? How do we keep fans on board? Well, right now, live performances aren't happening, and prior to the crisis, Karen, let me throw this one at you. Prior to the crisis, venues were closing, and so we were dealing with that, as Kwende points out. It's a global problem. How are we keeping artists and their fans connected?
It's definitely challenging, but we've seen some pretty big positive reactions to people going online, the virtual dance parties that are happening, and people just really craving this need to interact with other humans while they're, living in isolation. And so, it gives us that advantage that people are really craving that interaction. They're going to be more likely maybe than they would have been before to click on, a random local artist link to do this. They might be looking for opportunities for entertainment, and they'll jump on board there. So perhaps they'll expand their fan base as well. I think one big challenge here, outside of fans in particular, is just keeping these social networks, collaboratives of musicians and people who are working together, making sure they stay connected. There can be a feeling from social media that everyone sees what you're posting, when in actuality, you're only reaching a small fragment of what your potential is. So then it comes into play, do we have, education out there for artists? How do you use your social media to maximize your reach and make sure you're using all the different features of each platform, so that not only can you be engaging all your fans, but you can be engaging new fans as well, and then hoping that other artists are going to see the posts that you make and the links that you share, so that they can jump on, and hopefully we still have this vibrant and collaborative music community.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, can I jump in on this quickly? I just wanted to just sort of again reiterate something that Karen was saying about the way that essentially having these or having people in your community who can be almost keepers of these social networks, and really that's the role of promoters in the broader scheme of sort of the ecosystem of players within the industry. Promoters, part of their role is to maintain this social network of people who want to be engaged with music, and then connect them to either a venue or in this case, a digital location where people can be connecting. And it's interesting to see how much actually, to your point, Karen, I was also on the premiere and Reece's stream, and lots of people were around the world. But actually, it seems like it's actually localized social networks that are keeping communities alive. And despite the fact that social networks are a global phenomena, I think another area of interesting research would be to see how much actually localized social network activity was involved in keeping some of these communities alive. Like, I know in my own community, I DJ, as the records might indicate, and we have been doing a whole bunch of stuff on social media in terms of streaming our sets and raising money through PayPal pools for different venues and local music businesses. And that's because we've been promoting for 15 years. We have a big social network, and we have been maintaining it for a long time, such that, when this thing hit, we were able to keep it connected, and also through that, also generate some revenue for ourselves and for our community.
That's make a good point, Merlijn. Let's talk about live streaming. We've all witnessed a lot of it the last few weeks everywhere. How's that actually going to work, Merlijn? And our friend Michael Blair asks, what's the most efficient way of seeing that it's paid for, and that the artists and the professionals who support the artists get paid for their work?
Yeah. Well, I think it all starts with the interaction, because we see so many live streams out there aimed at everyone, and to be honest, a lot of them are also pretty boring. And for instance, on a small scale, I saw a local drum and bass DJ in the Netherlands. He's not so big, but he said, like, everyone who has supported me on Patreon can be in a group, max 100 people, even if they supported him for €1. And then he did something in this Discord group, this app that's usually being used by gamers. And everyone that donated could also bring in a sound, and then he would convert all those 200 sounds in a new track that he was making. So this kind of interaction is pretty funny. And with my own company, we do social media in China for the Chinese market, and the Chinese internet is totally different. But what are kind of ahead of us is that you can really interact with the live streams, and that if there's a singer, for instance, you can pick the singer, or you can ask to do, let this person do something. And we now, in the last week, already see that bigger artists have their manager sitting on the side and asking the audience a question, and that someone who enters might, when we have events again, maybe go backstage with this person. So if we aim to get more interaction, instead of passively looking at a DJ, like I'm not a DJ, and if you're a DJ, it might be more interesting to see if he's mixing, but a lot of people are not DJs, and they just want to see something happening and some interaction, and to be recognized that they are valuable as watchers. So I think we can look towards that a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And just to chime in on that, Merlijn, like, again, for our streams, because I DJ as part of a crew, and part of our strategy is that one of us DJs and the other one engages, with people online. And we found that, that has been a big key to driving, our ability to, generate revenue through this, because ultimately people want to be engaged, and they're looking for some both familiar form of engagement because they're coming to us to listen to the music that we play, but then also a different kind of engagement too. And so you have to try and figure that out. And it'll be different for every community how people want to be engaged, but there has to be that component.
Yeah, absolutely.
Will the streaming business survive, thrive after COVID, or will we revert to the norm, go to events once we're allowed to touch one another, and all of that kind of thing?
I think that will be the main thing we get back to, I hope also. But on the other hand, I think the streaming will become more interesting and more a thing that will also stay. Especially now everyone is like, in 1 month, suddenly everyone is a streamer. In 2 months, people will already be more professional. And I think also when big brands and artists start collaborating on this, because it's new for everyone, then there are also a business model that wasn't there coming in, which can also be dangerous. But yeah, I think it will stay, but I really hope we get back as soon as possible to the real life meetings on sweaty dance floors.
I'm really, well, I mean, that's what we all really want, right? I mean, it's that sweaty dance floor, the energy of other people, and you can only get so much of that from a live stream. I mean, it is so much about that human connection. But I think I'll be really interested to see how that works out from an equity perspective. One of the issues right now, Kwende, you were talking about local networks, local social networks. One of the issues that we have in Madison is that because artists aren't able to access those local stages, they don't have as much of a hometown fan base as other musicians might have. So they might be a little more, so if they want to make money, if they want to build a fan base, they need to go online. They need to build social networks in other areas. They need to try to get concerts or shows or tours in other areas, unfortunately. So in this, what's happening right now, it's a little more difficult for them to keep local fan bases. But I'm hoping that through the use of technology, we can expand that. And then the streaming issue could potentially be a way for us to overcome the issue of artists not being able to access local stages. If we're able to still get that voice out through a streaming platform, again, that could be a way to combat. And it's really about this, this dominant narrative that hip hop is violent, and that we know that the term hip hop is used as code for Black and brown people. So it's really combating a generations long narrative that is, rooted in systemic oppression. So it's very difficult. We've been working on it for just 10 years, and it's a slow moving process, but I'm hoping some of these new tools will be new ways for us to fight that as well.
Mm-hmm. It has always been an issue in our industry that the 80-20 rule for revenue and benefit applies, whether you're talking about a venue, talking about an individual artist, talking about someone who does lights and sound. It's always been the case. And I harbor a hope that there will be some greater democratization coming out of this crisis.
Let me just jump in a second. Great conversation. Just want to point out that in the Q&A we have some questions, and in the chat we have some questions. So I know that some panelists are responding to all panelists and not the participants in the chat. So just waving a flag in.
We're working at them, and some of them we're trying to cover.
I was just going to say, when you answer them, just click answered, and they'll move into the answered.
Okay. We've looking at Q&A first of all from our audience. We were asked about venues being able to survive the pandemic. I guess that's an open question. Anyone want to take a crack at that on the panel?
Well, I mean, I think that you know, I've been in some conversations with different people around the world who focus on this issue, and you know, there's no two ways around this. I think that ultimately this is a point in time where many venues are going to have to figure out new business models and new ways of operating, because it's challenge. I think, you know, there's going to have to be change going in multiple different directions. One, obviously, governments are going to have to be more flexible in terms of the way that they relate to these types of businesses. Because even in Canada, like, you know, the Business Development Bank of Canada, for a time, was not going to be including venues in sort of like the bailout that they were doing for businesses. And then, you know, through some lobbying work and good work that was done by advocates here in Canada, that changed. But at the same time, you know, there's a whole range of resources that are available for not-for-profit organizations in music that are just not available for bars and for-profit organizations. And so the question is this an opportunity for some of these organizations to rethink the way that they do business? So, like, if they really are about doing music, are they going to form a not-for-profit that operates within this for-profit business, and then, you know, books and manages the music side of the operation as a not-for-profit, and then the bar just sells booze? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, is it that, like, this is an opportunity to really think about, like, a different structure for, you know, bars or businesses that sell alcohol that also want to be involved in the music industry?
Merlijn, you're a nighttime mayor.
Well, I think in general, clubs and venues in a lot of places are not recognized as culture. Even in Germany, for instance, it took a lot of lobbying to let them be on a different level than brothels and casinos. And gradually now people are seeing that they're a vital part of our society. And I think the advocating of that to also then be able to receive some funds, which is for these specific sectors. But yeah, we do need to rethink their business models, but in general, first being recognized as culture instead of just a place where you get alcohol, because the alcohol is the side thing. And even if you don't have artists playing all day, it's a really important part of our culture. So me as a night mayor and the whole worldwide movement of nightlife advocacy expert is in every government trying to bring in that message, kind of. That will help, I guess. I hope.
Karen, you work with a lot of venues. Well, everyone here does. But what about the idea of cutting out the middleman? I know this is a heresy. You cut out the booze-selling bartender. You cut out the organizer of the festival. You cut out as many people as possible and establish a more direct relationship between the producer of the art and the consumer of the art. Is that something that you talk to your musicians about?
We are constantly talking about relationships, especially because of that barrier that we're facing. So locally, there's no music venue in the greater Madison area that that will book a full hip hop set. So if we want a hip hop set to happen, it's a promoter needs to go in and get them to agree to give a date that they can book artists for. So we're constantly, and that's even difficult. So we're always talking about building those relationships with people, and how can you, if you're relating with the consumer of the art, what contacts might they have that can help you get other shows set up. So I mean, I think that's critical, but I do think that we're always going to need some sort of management to coordinate the two, because artists, should be focused on their art to keep producing and staying creative, and fans should be able to, and consumers should be able to focus on that and pick and choose where they want to go. And so that does kind of, in my opinion, requires sort of a more objective, business-focused third party who can bring those two together. But that person has to be focused on the arts and specifically the culture of it for it to be valuable, and not just the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
If I could offer something here just to that, and I think that this is an interesting place and role for, or place, role, and way to think about local and community media networks, and sort of like the role that they really could be playing as we go forward, and think about what not only music communities look like in the future, but also like the whole emergency preparedness component of sort of having to keep a community, a community and a local industry really together in times of crisis. I mean, when we think about the role that local media plays currently and the role it could play in that context, I think that there's actually a lot of potential there.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, in Groningen, just launched an initiative called Cosimo, in which we connect the artists and the venues and the local businesses that might be in a total different branch, that have some tax spending that they otherwise would spend to the tax agency, that they, through us, can give it to the artists. And if you can choose to support your local culture or pay the tax, well, then most people choose the first thing. And in these kind of ways, we think that to support the, how do you call it, the herd of artists and everything, the system of music, that local businesses that care about this and can also shine with the fact that they made it possible, that we can connect these on the web lab, and the local media is a very important partner in that too, to show what's happening and not only focus on the big national things. So yeah, I totally agree with Kwende in that.
Let me throw this at each of you, starting with you, Karen. Are you optimistic about our industry and the parts that you're trying to play in it? And if you are, why? And if you're not, why not?
I have to be optimistic. As I said, this is a very slow battle that we've been fighting. The gears turn very slowly. So it requires optimism. It requires hope that we'll be able to get somewhere and get our message across. But, looking at just the immediate situation with COVID-19, I'm looking at all of the different forms of technology, the ways of convening, and thinking about how we can integrate those things potentially with, once we're able to get back out into the community, what does that look like? And how can we make things even more accessible and even more creative, and connecting artists for collaborations with the tools that we're using.
Mm-hmm. Kwende, what do you think?
I look at it from a few different perspectives. Definitely as a creator and somebody who, is somebody who creates music and puts on events. It's really challenging because I know the difference between the money that we would have been making, putting on shows and so on, DJing concerts and so on, and what we're doing right now. We are finding ways to generate revenue right now through online streaming and the community that we are able to put together, but it's asking a lot of that community. It's asking a lot of that community, and I worry about that when I think into the future. And then at the same time, as a policy person who's sort of thinking longer term, I definitely think this is an interesting period of time, and I am optimistic about people innovating new ways of thinking about the industry, hopefully in ways that are actually more equitable, and that we can use some of these technological solutions to build that. But also, I'm also excited about the transformation of older systems, or the adapting of older systems into sort of like, whatever new form that they're going to need to take to be contributing to the new reality.
Right. Merlijn, let's finish with you.
And he's on mute. Well, he's on mute, and he's unmuted. So just a programming note. We're at the end of this time, but you guys can keep going a bit. There's another room going on, I'll flag too, but doesn't have to be the end with Merlijn commenting, and I will unmute him.
Well, I also share the optimism in a way that this period, all sitting at home, makes us very creative and finding new solutions. And I think a start in this, you saw this meme that people in their isolation without the books and the music and the artists would be very bored, and how important they are. So I really hope that artists after this period will be considered also as important as businesses that constantly get money, while people before always regarded the artists as people holding up their hand because they're just doing their hobby. And now people see that they're actually really vital in making life enjoyable. And for instance, the way the government helps farmers compared to people in the cultural sector is ridiculously different as well. If perception is going to change after this period, and we're fighting for that, of course, I think good things can come out too.
Right. Good. Well, thank you, panel. We're only 1 minute away from finishing, so I think now we can go on to the Slack channel.
I was going to say also, what we've been doing is I've been copying over some of the things from the chat into the Slack channel. The question I have as a closing question is, how would you like to be contacted? So if someone is watching this video later or wanting to reach out to the Slack channel, some people have been sharing their web places, some have been sharing their email, some have been sharing their phone number. I'm not sure I'm going to share my phone number on this, but feel free to both type it into the chat, as well as you can ask what type of need and ask do you have? Who would you like to reach out to from this conversation?
Good. Thank you.
Did you want us to say it right now, Gigi?
Sure.
You can reach me by email. The email is info@ucanmadison, UCANMADISON.org. We are also on Facebook, Urban Community Arts Network, and we're on Twitter, UCAN-Madison as well. And I would actually love to hear from anyone who can help me with technology for electronic music and voice that can be accessible.
I am putting some links in there. I'm going to put my LinkedIn in there, my Twitter in there, personal, and then if people are interested in the music stuff that we do, I'll put some of that stuff in there as well in terms of where you can catch our music. We're DJing 2 live streams a week from our studios. And finding ways to make it less boring, Merlijn, and yeah, so I'll put some of that as well. And also, I've been doing some writing on Medium about some of these topics and just sort of broader thinking about the music industry and the space society relationship and how all of that is rolling out. So I'll link to that as well.
And I put that link in Medium already, so that's there as well. So you guys have a gigantic amount of fabulous links here. I'd like to thank you guys for participating in this part of the adventure.